Kia ora I te whānau. Let's keep going with chapter 6. It's been a little while. Still setting up house a little bit. And, different reading corner, obviously. Chapter 6, which concerns the color blue. Charmaine sighed and stuffed the king's letter into her pocket. She did not feel like sharing whatever it said with Peter. Why? She said. Why are they angry? Come and see, Peter said. It all sounds ridiculous to me. I told them that you were in charge, and they had to wait until you had finished being polite to those witches. Witches? Said Charmaine. One of them was my mother. Well, my mother's a witch, Peter said, and you only had to look at the proud one in silk to see that she was a witch. Do come on. He held the door open for Charmaine, and she went through, thinking that Peter was probably right about Aunt Sempronia. No one in the baker's respectable house ever mentioned witchcraft, but Charmaine had thought that Aunt Sempronia was a witch for years, without ever putting it to herself so baldly. She forgot about Aunt Sempronia as soon as she entered the kitchen. There were kobolds everywhere. Little blue men with different shapes of large blue noses were standing anywhere there was a space on the floor that was not full of dog dishes or spilled tea. They were on the table between teapots and in the sink balanced on dirty dishes. There were little blue women, too, mostly perched on the laundry bags. The women were distinguished by their smaller, gentler noses and their rather stylish flounced blue skirts. I'd like a skirt like that, Charmaine thought. Only larger, of course. There were so many kobolds that it took Charmaine a moment to notice that the bubbles from the fireplace were nearly gone. All the kobolds raised a shrill shout as Charmaine came in. We seem to have got the whole tribe, Peter said. Charmaine thought he was probably right. Very well, she said above the yelling. I'm here. What's the problem? The answer was such a storm of yelling that Charmaine put her hands over her ears. That'll do, she shouted. How can I understand a word you say when you all scream at once? She recognized the kobold who had appeared in the living room, standing on a chair with at least 6 others. His nose was a very memorable shape. You tell me. What was your name again? He gave her a curt little bow. Timmins is my name. I understand you are Charming Baker, and you speak for the wizard. Am I right? More or less, Charmaine said. There did not seem to be much point in arguing about her name. Besides, she rather liked being called charming. I told you the wizard's ill. He's gone away to get cured. So you say, Timmins answered. Are you sure he hasn't run away? This produced such yells and jeers from all over the kitchen that Charmaine had to shout again to get heard. Be quiet! Of course he hasn't run away. I was here when he went. He was very unwell, and the elves had to carry him. He would have died if the elves hadn't taken him. In the near silence that followed this, Timmins said sulkily, If you say so, we believe you, of course. Our quarrel is with the wizard, but maybe you can settle it. And I tell you, we don't like it. It's indecent. What is? Charmaine asked. Timmins squeezed his eyes up and glowered over his nose. You are not to laugh. The wizard laughed when I complained to him. I promise not to laugh, Charmaine said. So what is it? We were very angry, Timmins said. Our ladies refused to wash his dishes for him, and we took away his taps so that he couldn't wash them himself. But all he did was smile and say he hadn't the strength to argue. Well, he was ill, Charmaine said. You know that now. So what is it about? This garden of his, Timmins said. The complaint came first from Rollo, but I came and took a look, and Rollo was quite right. The wizard was growing bushes with blue flowers, which is the correct and reasonable color for flowers to be. But by his magic he had made half the same bushes pink. Some of them were even green or white, which is disgusting and incorrect. Here Peter was unable to contain himself. But hydrangeas are like that, he burst out. I've explained it to you. Any gardener could tell you. If you don't put the bluing powder under the whole bush, some of the flowers are going to be pink. Rollo's a gardener. He must have known. Charmaine looked around the crowded kitchen but could not see Rollo anywhere among the swarms of blue people. He probably only told you, she said, because he likes to chop things down. I bet he kept asking the wizard if he could chop the bushes down, and the wizard said no. He asked me last night. At this, Rollo popped up from beside a dog dish, almost at Charmaine's feet. She recognized him mostly by his grating little voice when he shouted, "And so I did ask her! And she sits there in the path, having just floated down from the sky, cool as you please, and tells me I only wants to enjoy myself. As bad as the wizard she is." Charmaine glared down at him. "You're just a destructive little beast," she said. "What you're doing is making trouble because you can't get your own way." Rollo flung out an arm. "Hear her? Hear that? Who's wrong here? Her or me?" A dreadful, shrill clamor arose from all over the kitchen. Timmins shouted for silence, and when the clamor had died into muttering, he said to Charmaine, "So will you now give permission for these disgraceful bushes to be lopped down?" "No, I will not," Charmaine told him. "They're great-uncle William's bushes, and I'm supposed to look after all his things for him, and Rollo's just making trouble." Timmins said, squeezing his glower at her, "Is that your last word?" "Yes," said Charmaine, "it is." "Then," Timmins said, "you're on your own. No kobold is going to do a hand's turn for you from now on." And they were all gone. Just like that. The blue crowd vanished from among teapots and dog dishes and dirty crockery, leaving a little wind stirring the last few bubbles about, and the fire now burning brightly in the grate. "That was stupid of you," Peter said. "What do you mean?" Charmaine asked indignantly. "You're the one who said those bushes were supposed to be like that, and you could see Rollo had got them all stirred up on purpose. I couldn't let great-uncle William come home to find his garden all chopped down, could I?" "Yes, but you could have been more tactful," Peter insisted. "I was expecting you to say we'd put down a bluing spell to make all the flowers blue or something." "Yes, but Rollo would still have wanted to cut them all down," Charmaine said. "He told me I was a spoilsport last night for not letting him." "You could have made them see what he was like," Peter said, "instead of making them all even angrier." "At least I didn't laugh at them, like great-uncle William did," Charmaine retorted. "He made them angry, not me. And look where that got him," Peter said. "They took away his taps and left all his dishes dirty. So now we've got to wash them all without even any hot water in the bathroom." Charmaine flounced down into the chair and began, again, to open the king's letter. "Why have we got to?" she said. "I haven't the remotest idea how to wash dishes anyway." Peter was scandalized. "You haven't? Why ever not?" Charmaine got the envelope open and pulled out a beautiful, large, stiff, folded paper. "My mother brought me up to be respectable," she said. "She never let me near the scullery, or the kitchen either." "I don't believe this," Peter said. "Why is it respectable not to know how to do things? Is it respectable to light a fire with a bar of soap?" "That," Charmaine said haughtily, "was an accident. Please be quiet. Let me read my letter." She pulled her glasses up onto her nose and unfolded the stiff paper. "Dear Mistress Baker," she read. "Well, I'm going to get on and try," Peter said. "I'm blowed if I'm going to be bullied by a crowd of little blue people. And I think you had enough pride. I should think you had enough pride to help me do it." "Shut up," said Charmaine, and concentrated on her letter. "Dear Mistress Baker, how kind of you to offer us your services. In the normal way, we would find the assistance of our daughter, the Princess Hilda, sufficient for our need. But it so happens that the princess is about to receive important visitors and is obliged to forego her work in the library for the duration of the visit. We therefore gratefully accept your kind offer on a temporary basis. If you would be so good as to present yourself at the royal mansion this coming Wednesday morning at around 10:30, We shall be happy to receive you in our library and instruct you in our work. Your obliged and grateful Adolphus Rex Norlandi Alti. Charmaine's heart banged and bumped as she read the letter, and it was not until she reached the end of it that she realized that the amazing, unlikely, unbelievable thing had happened. The king had agreed to let her help him in the royal library. Tears came into her eyes. She was not sure why, and she had to whisk her glasses off. Her heart hammered with joy, then with alarm. Was today Wednesday? Had she missed her chance? She had been hearing, without attending, Peter crashing saucepans about and kicking dog dishes aside as he went to the inner door. Now she heard him come back again. What day is it today? She asked him. Peter set the large saucepan he was carrying down, hissing, on the fire. I'll tell you if you tell me where he keeps his soap, he said. Bother you, said Charmaine. It's in the pantry in a bag labeled something like canonitis. Now, what day is it? Cloths, said Peter. Tell me where cloths are first. Did you know there are 2 new bags of laundry in this pantry now? I don't know where cloths are, Charmaine said. What day is it? Cloths first, said Peter. He doesn't answer me when I ask. He didn't know you were coming, Charmaine said. Is it Wednesday yet? I can't think why he didn't know, Peter said. He got my letter. Ask for cloths. Charmaine sighed. Great Uncle William, she said. This stupid boy wants to know where cloths are, please. The kindly voice replied, Do you know, my dear, I nearly forgot cloths. They're in the table drawer. It's Tuesday, Peter said, pouncing on the drawer and dragging it open almost into Charmaine's stomach. He said as he fetched out wads of toweling and dishcloths, I know it must be Tuesday, because I set off from home on Saturday and it took me 3 days to walk here. Satisfied? Thank you, Charmaine said. Very kind of you. Then I'm afraid I'll have to go into town tomorrow. I may be gone all day. Then isn't it lucky that I'm here to look after the place for you, Peter said. Where are you skiving off to? The king, Charmaine said, with great dignity, has asked me to go and help him. Read this if you don't believe me. Peter picked up the letter and looked it over. I see, he said. You've arranged to be in 2 places at once. Nice for you. So you can darn well help me wash these dishes now, when the water's hot. Why? I didn't get them dirty, Charmaine said. She pocketed her letter and stood up. I'm going into the garden. I didn't get them dirty either, Peter said, and it was your uncle who annoyed the kobolds. Charmaine simply swept past him toward the living room. You've got nothing to do with being respectable, Peter shouted after her. You're just lazy. Charmaine took no notice and swept onward to the front door. Waif followed her, bustling appealingly around her ankles, but Charmaine was too annoyed with Peter to bother with Waif. Always criticizing, she said. He's never stopped once since he got here. As if he was perfect, she said as she flung open the front door. She gasped. The kobolds had been busy, very quickly. True, they had not cut down the bushes because she had told them not to, but they had cut off every single pink bloom and most of the mauve or white ones. The front path was strewn with pink and lilac umbrellas of hydrangea flowers, and she could see more lying among the bushes. Charmaine gave a cry of outrage and rushed forward to pick them up. Lazy, am I? She muttered as she collected hydrangea heads into her skirt. Oh, poor great Uncle William, what a mess. He liked them all colors. Oh, those little blue beasts. She went to tip the flowers out of her skirt onto the table outside the study window and discovered a basket by the wall there. She took it with her among the bushes. While Waif scuttled and snorted and sniffed around her, Charmaine scooped up, snipped off hydrangea heads by the basket load. She chuckled rather meanly when she discovered that the kobolds had not always been certain which were blue. They had left most of the ones that were greenish, and some that were lavender-colored, while there was one bush at which they must have had real trouble, because each flower on each of its umbrellas was pink in the middle and blue on the outside. To judge by the numbers of tiny footprints around this bush, they had held a meeting about it. In the end, they had cut the blooms off one half of the bush and left the rest. "See, it's not that easy," Charmaine said loudly, in case there were any kobolds around listening. "And what it really is vandalism, and I hope you're ashamed." She carried her last basketful back to the table, repeating, "Vandals, bad behavior, little beasts," and hoping that Rollo, at least, was somewhere listening. Some of the biggest heads had quite long stalks. Charmaine collected those into a large pink, mauve, and greenish-white bunch and spread the rest out on the table to dry in the sun. She remembered reading somewhere that you could dry hydrangeas, and they would stay the same color and make good decorations for winter. Great Uncle William would enjoy these, she thought. "So you see, it is useful to sit and read a lot," she announced to the air. By this time, however, she knew she was just trying to justify herself to the world, if not to Peter, because she had been rather too impressed with herself for getting a letter from the king. "Oh, well," she said. "Come on, Waif." Waif followed Charmaine into the house, but backed away from the kitchen door, trembling. Charmaine saw why when she came into the kitchen, and Peter looked up from his steaming saucepan. He had found an apron from somewhere, and stacked all the crockery in neat heaps along the floor. He gave Charmaine a look of righteous pain. "Very ladylike," he said. "I ask you to help me wash up, and you pick flowers." "No, really," Charmaine said. "Those beastly kobolds have cut off all the pink ones." "They have?" Peter said. "That's too bad." "Your uncle's going to be upset when he comes home, isn't he? You could put your flowers in that dish where the eggs are." Charmaine looked at the pie dish full of eggs crammed in beside the big bag of soap flakes among the teapots on the table. "Then where do we put the eggs?" "Just a moment." She went away to the bathroom and put the hydrangeas in the wash basin. It was rather ominously moist and trickly in there, but Charmaine preferred not to think about that. She went back to the kitchen and said, "Now I'm going to nurture the hydrangea bushes by emptying these teapots on them." "Nice try," Peter said. "That'll take you several hours. Do you think this water is hot yet?" "Only steaming," Charmaine said. "I think it ought to bubble, and it won't take me hours. Watch." She sorted out 2 largest saucepans and began emptying teapots into them. She was saying, "There are some advantages to being lazy, you know," when she realized that, as soon as she had emptied a teapot and put it back on the table, the teapot disappeared. "Leave us one," Peter said anxiously. "I'd like a hot drink." Charmaine thought about this and carefully put the last teapot down on the chair. It disappeared too. "Oh, well," Peter said. Since he was obviously trying not to be so unfriendly, Charmaine said, "We can get afternoon tea in the living room after I've emptied these. And my mother brought me another bag of food when she came." Peter cheered up remarkably. "Then we can have a decent meal when we've done the washing up," he said. "We're doing that first, whatever you say." And he held Charmaine to it, in spite of her protests. As soon as she came in from the garden, Peter came and took the book out of her hands and presented her with a cloth to tie around her waist instead. Then he led her to the kitchen, where the mysterious and horrible process began. Peter thrust another cloth into her hands. "You wipe and I'll wash," he said, lifting the steaming saucepan off the fire, then pouring half the hot water on the soap flakes sprinkled in the sink. He heaved up a bucket of cold water from the pump and poured half of that in the sink too. "Why are you doing that?" Charmaine asked. "So as not to get scalded," Peter replied, plunging knives and forks into his mixture and following those with a stack of plates. "Don't you know anything?" "No," Charmaine said. She thought irritably that not one of the many books she had read had so much as mentioned washing dishes, let alone explained how you did it. She watched as Peter briskly used a dishcloth to wipe old dinner off a patterned plate. The plate came out of the suds bright and clean. Charmaine rather liked the pattern now, and was almost inclined to believe that this was magic. She watched Peter dip the plate in another bucket to rinse it. Then he handed it to her. "What do I do with this?" she asked. "Wipe it dry, of course," he said, "then stack it on the table." Charmaine tried. The whole horrible business took ages. The wiping cloth hardly seemed to soak up water at all, and the plate kept nearly slithering out of her hands. She was so much slower at wiping than Peter was at washing that Peter soon had a heap of plates draining beside the sink and began to get impatient. Naturally, at that point, the prettiest patterned plate slid out of Charmaine's hands completely and fell on the floor. Unlike the strange teapots, it broke. "Oh," Charmaine said, staring down at the pieces. "How do you put them together?" Peter rolled his eyes up toward the ceiling. "You don't," he said. "You just take care not to drop another." He collected the pieces of plate and threw them into another bucket. "I'll wipe now. You try your hand at washing, or we'll be all day." He let the now brownish water out of the sink, collected the knives, forks, and spoons out of it, and dropped them in the rinsing bucket. To Charmaine's surprise, they all seemed to be clean and shiny now. As she watched Peter fill the sink again with more soap and hot water, she decided, crossly but quite reasonably, that Peter had chosen the easy part of the work. She found she was mistaken. She did not find it easy at all. It took her slow ages on each piece of crockery, and she got soaked down the front of her in the process. And Peter kept handing back to her plates and cups, saucers and mugs, and saying they were still dirty. Nor would he let her wash any of the many dog dishes until the human crockery was done. Charmaine thought this was too bad of him. Waif had licked each one so clean that Charmaine knew they would be easier to wash than anything else. Then, on top of this, she was horrified to find that her hands were coming out of the suds all red and covered with strange wrinkles. "I must be ill," she said. "I've got a horrible skin disease." She was annoyed and offended when Peter laughed at her. But the dreadful business was done at last. Charmaine, damp in front and wrinkly in the hands, went sulkily off to the living room to read The 12-Branched Wand by the slanting light of the setting sun, leaving Peter to stack the clean things in the pantry. By this time, she was feeling she might go mad if she didn't sit and read for a while. "I've hardly read a word all day," she thought. Peter interrupted her much too soon by coming in with a vase he had found and filled with the hydrangeas, which he dumped down on the table in front of her. "Where's that food you said your mother brought?" he said. "What?" Charmaine said, peering at him through the foliage. "I said food," Peter told her. Waif seconded him by leaning against Charmaine's legs and groaning. "Oh," Charmaine said, "yes, food. You can have some if you promise not to dirty a single dish eating it." "That's all right," Peter said. "I'm so hungry I could lick it off the carpet." So Charmaine reluctantly stopped reading and dragged the bag of food out from behind the armchair, and they all three ate large numbers of Mr. Baker's beautiful pasties, followed by afternoon tea, twice, from the trolley. In the course of this huge meal, Charmaine parked the vase of hydrangeas on the trolley to be out of the way. When she next looked, they had vanished. "I wonder where they went," Peter said. "You can sit on the trolley and find out," Charmaine suggested. But Peter did not feel like going that far, to Charmaine's disappointment. While she ate, she tried to think of ways of persuading Peter to go away, back to Montalbino. It was not that she utterly disliked him, exactly. It was just annoying to share the house with him, and she knew, as clearly as if Peter had told her, that the next thing he was going to make her do was to empty the things out of those laundry bags and wash them too. The idea of more washing made her shudder. "At least," she thought, "I'm not going to be here tomorrow, so he can't make me do it then." All at once, she was hideously nervous. She was going to see the king. She had been crazy to write to him, quite mad, and now she was going to have to go and see him. Her appetite went away. She looked up from her last creamy scone and found it was now dark outside. The magical lighting had come on indoors, filling the room with what seemed like golden sunshine, but the windows were black. "I'm going to bed," she said. "I've got a long day tomorrow." "If that king of yours has any sense," Peter said, "he'll kick you straight out as soon as he sees you. Then you can come back here and do the laundry." Since both these things were exactly what Charmaine was afraid of, she did not answer. She simply picked up Memoirs of an Exorcist for some light reading, marched to the door with it, and turned left to where the bedrooms were. Thank you for joining me. Hope to see you again real soon.